technical details done and over with. Thank you again for joining us today. And as you all know, we will be discussing the direct democracy trends in last year. I think with more and more evident democratic backsliding, we all need a little bit of, hope and maybe inspiration from around the world. And yesterday, Clara and Raul, the authors of Global State of Direct Democracy report, will present us their findings, trends in the past, but also prediction for trends. And yeah, hopefully we will get this beacon of hope. You will also, of course, be able to access the report. I will post the link in the chat in a couple of minutes, and you will receive it as well in the follow-up after webinar mailing end of this week, maybe beginning of next one. And last but not least, of course, this webinar is organized together with Direct Democracy Navigator, which is a database of direct democracy instruments that now documents over 2,000 tools around the world. If you want to know more about this great database, I will also post the link in the chat. And this report has been long awaited for us, the Navigator team, and Bruno Kaufmann, who is with the Navigator from the very beginning of it, from over 10 years now, will open up this evening by telling us how this report actually came to be. So Bruno, Clara, Raul, thank you for joining us. And Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anja, for this introduction, and thank you everybody to be with us here tonight. I'm happy to join you from Arboga, Sweden, in my little summer house. We are enjoying here the last days of summer, and that's of course very nice to be here with you. And I will briefly introduce the whole project, because it, as Anja has said, it's a project which has been a very long project, a very let's say comprehensive project, and it has a lot to do with also what we experience just now this year, which has been called the super election year. As we know, never before in the world history have so many people been able to vote, to participate in an election. But also behind that, of course, there are many elections which are about issues which are initiated by people through initiatives where you vote on an issue. And this specific feature of elections, the direct decision-making on issues, but also the agenda setting, has been something which has been for a very long time, you can say, under-researched, under-evaluated, under-assessed. So in the last 20, 30 years, many of us who have been involved in organizations like Democracy International, the Swiss Democracy Foundation, or other organizations around the world, we have looked into this issue very much. I mean, this map you see here is the map of elections, but beyond that, there are, of course, many regional, local decision-making processes. Until now, in fact, about 2.5 billion votes have been given this year, but there is a lot to come. I mean, in Switzerland, where I'm a citizen of, we have 4 times a year, as you know, votes on constitutional and statutory issues. Now again on the 22nd of September. But most interestingly, there is a big debate in Switzerland just now about the formalities around initiatives and referendums, because you may have heard that there is a controversy about many signatures being fake, being done on wrong premises. So there's a major discussion also about the integrity of the initiative and the referendum process in Switzerland. But in many other places around the world this year, there are votes coming up, there are referendums coming up. For instance, in Kazakhstan, this major, the ninth biggest country of the world, the biggest landlocked country in the world, will have a national referendum on the building of a first nuclear plant in October 6th. And of course, we all know the major election and voting day in the United States is just a little bit more than 60 days away, where so many people can vote on so many different issues, including, of course, the president, but also there are an enormous amount of initiatives, local votes, which are in a way interacting with the elections and which can have an impact on them. So the impact of direct democracy, even on electoral democracy and on elections of representatives, are immense. And this has been an issue which we, in the last 15 years, as long as we have established the so-called Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy, which is a platform for debate, for meetings, for exchange, for learning around the issue of direct democracy, have had a continuous conversation about how can we evaluate, how can we assess, how can we compare direct democratic procedures and practices around the world. And since 2008, for this reason, we have had a discussion, but also a very concrete work to establish, you can say, a database, a grammar for direct democracy around the world, which has led to the establishment of the Direct Democracy Navigator, which is a tool to identify legal designs of direct democracy according to different kind of types, which we have also established. And you can say that first, before we could really identify all these different kind of procedures, legal designs, there was an important discussion about how to typologize, how to define different forms of direct democracy, which are initiated from the people or by the government or by the law, which are about signature gathering for putting issues on the agenda, but also being involved in decision-making at the very end. And there is an enormous variety, diversity of forms of direct democracy around the world. And of course, you will never catch everything, but this Direct Democracy Navigator, I must say, and all the people who have been involved over all these years have done such a great work, put hours, days, months, years of their work time into that. So we can have a little of an overview about which kind of tools are there. Also, most importantly, is that direct democracy today is, of course, something which we pay a lot of attention to if there is a major national referendum, maybe even one which impacts other countries, like we have experienced, for instance, on issues about the European Union integration. Again, now, for instance, in October, on the 20th of October, the Moldovan people will vote if they want to apply for EU membership in their constitution. So there are a lot of things which are interrelated also on the international level. But most importantly, direct democracy is living on the subnational level, on the regional level, on the province level, on the state level in many countries, including, for instance, Germany, where you don't have any form of national referendum, but you have enormous variety and richness of direct democracy on the state level and on the local level. So people are all over the world experiencing, using, looking into this issue. And in general, you can also say most people around the world really appreciate forms of direct democracy as a principle. When it comes to procedures, then, of course, experience makes people more or less skeptical about how direct democracy is used. And that's the reason why, based on this criteria, on this grammar, the world of direct democracy has been mapped, has been looked into, but at the same time, not really being understood, you can say, in a more stringent or a scientific way, because until now we had especially put all our efforts in identifying, in labeling, in defining direct democratic practices, but not so much in, based on all this information, comparing it and assessing their impacts in a scientific way, so we can learn from how it works. What we have done is using the Navigator in developing educational tools like the European, global, and Swiss democracy passports, which are using the knowledge of the Navigator for educational and informational meanings. And also there has been many journalistic projects in comparing direct democratic practices around the world, like, for instance, this cooperation between the Swiss Broadcasting Company, International Service, Swissinfo, and Animal Politico in Mexico last year when the Global Forum was taking place in Mexico. There has been seminars, there has been conferences organized around the Navigator. And again, you can say at the end, we always knew we have to invest more, we have to put more efforts into that. And that's the reason why and I can say in that way, we, Democracy International and the Swiss Democracy Foundation, together with all our partners who are supporting this project in different kinds, by money, by their knowledge, by their support, why we are so happy that we, about 2 years ago, really developed this cooperation now also with the world of universities, with Clara and Raul, to look into that as a scientific project. So at this moment now, we get the first results of this cooperation, of this enormous investments, by having the first Global State of Democracy report, which is only a starting point for further communication, for further reports, for further publications. And we also plan to do in addition to the Global State of Democracy report, a publication which will put together briefs and news into an outlook report every year, which will be the world in a specific year report to be published in the beginning of the year. Having said that, I'm now looking forward to get the first results of the Global State of Democracy report, and I look forward to our conversations, discussions, and all our interested questions. And of course, you can say this is really also an invitation to all of us, to all of you, to participate in this. This is a cooperative effort. This is not something we can just delegate to others. Thank you very much. Looking forward to continuation of this great project and process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bruno. Thank you. And before we jump right into the State of Direct Democracy report, just a quick reminder, of course, you will be able to ask your questions in the Q&A session, but also you don't have to wait for that. You can already write your questions in the chat and we will answer them a bit later. And with that, yeah, Clara and Raul, please, we are very much looking forward to hear your findings.
Sorry, it takes always a bit starting Zoom. Hi everybody, very nice to see so many of you here to discuss the Global State of Direct Democracy report focusing on last year. There will be another one focusing on this year. For those of you who attended the Global Forum, there may be a bit of repetition, but at the same time we will further elaborate on different points. My name is Clara Egger. I work at the Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and I have the pleasure to serve as a board member of Democracy International. And I will be joined in this presentation by Raul, who will start. So Raul, you just let me know when you want me to just change the slide, and I let you introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you, Clara. Hi, everyone. I'm Raoul Magny-Berton. It's my name. I'm from Lille in France. And we decided with Clara and with Bruno, Democracy International, Navigator, Direct Democracy, to organize the first report of the state of direct democracy in the world. So we had to do some choices. The first choice is to focus on only on the national level. So this is like Bruno said, at local level there are a lot of activity, but we need to start with some principle for some description of what is already done in the world. So we started with the national level, and we plan to do a focus on some local level in country very dynamic in direct democracy, like the United States, Germany, and others, Mexico, for example. So the main problem is not, of course, to define direct democracy. This is very consensual. Usually there is a definition, which is the right to people to directly participate to decision in public policy. So they don't only vote to elect people, but also vote to public policy. So this is a very large definition, and it includes two important aspects of decision. The first one is the power to propose a law, and this is the initiative. When people, ordinary citizens, can initiate a project, a bill, this means that they have the first right to propose. Second right is to say yes or no, so to vote. So this is today referendum, the way to vote to a project. So this means participate to decision, or either initiate or vote. When there is this definition, we also know there is not an issue to classify different institutions of direct democracy, like, for example, mandatory referendum, authority referendum. We can call this referendum in different way, but the important is that usually the disagreements are minor on that, because we have in the world a map of different institutions, and they are well known. So the main challenge is the third aspect is to ranking these institutions. What is a better direct democracy or less better? We are talking of institutions that are embedded in a more larger institutional setting with representative judicial power and other usual institutions. And what is the best way to do direct democracy? And this is a normative aspect, so there is many debate on that. And we decided to just try to classify the best direct democracy institutions are the strongest. When direct democracy impact a lot society, this is the most best example of direct democracy. We can discuss if it is better to have a strong direct democracy or not, but at least in this report, we try to make a hierarchy between different institutions. So this is the most original aspect of this report. The most debatable too. So this is a point in which we can discuss more beyond the technical aspects. And what is so the strongest institution on direct democracy? The first aspect we identify is the hierarchy between the parliament and the citizen. In some countries, the parliament are the last word on any decision. For example, typically Italy or Slovenia. In these countries, there is the possibility for citizens to vote, even initiate a vote on public policies, but they decide only the ordinary law. So the parliament can overcome this decision. The parliament can also reduce the number of subjects in which we can vote, we can initiate something. For example, no referenda are accepted for financial aspects or institutional reforms. So this is also the way in which the direct democracy institutions are embedded in many, many countries. This hierarchy is different in other countries in which the direct decision is directly changed the constitution. So in this case, direct democracy is superior to the decision of the parliament. So this is the first aspect we have classified the systems. The second aspect is to really look at the initiative and veto rights. I just would like to remind, initiative means the possibility for each citizen to initiate a political change. And veto means the capacity to say yes or no for all propositions. So we can classify with these rights all the systems we know. For example, in this slide, you can see that agenda initiative, non-binding citizens-initiated referendum, legislative citizens initiative, and citizen-initiated constitutional amendment are 4 kinds of initiative rights. The first one, the agenda initiative, we have an example here, Austria, is the possibility to write the law and submit it with a number, if it is supported by a given number of signatures, to submit it to the parliament. So in this case, in Austria, people can initiate the law and the parliament say yes or no, have veto rights. In the second case, the case of New Zealand, there is a non-binding citizens-initiated referendum. It is a bit more than in Austria. People can initiate law and also submit it to a referendum. But if the result is yes, this doesn't mean that it is implemented, because it is not binding. So the parliament decide at the end. So in New Zealand, citizens have the initiative rights, but not the veto rights. The third type is the legislative citizens initiative. It is very common, especially in South America or in Eastern Europe. Here the example is Slovenia because it is very well used. And it is the case when people can submit to a referendum an initiative, but only an initiative on ordinary law. And this is different from the citizens initiate constitutional amendment, which is in Switzerland, but also in Uruguay, for example. And as we see, we can maybe in Taiwan. This is unclear today for the law. And this means that the decision of citizens is directly constitutional. So it is the most important. So people can initiate a constitutional law and vote. So this is usually the initiative rights. The veto rights is the possibility to say yes or no. So I suppose here that the initiative is not doesn't come from citizens, but rather by the parliament. Here again, there are three types. The first one is mandatory referendum, and it is like in Ireland, but also in many other countries. And it is the right, when the parliament want to change the constitution, we have to vote. There is no possibility for the parliament to implement a constitutional change without a referendum. And this is in this pure form, it is quite rare. But for example, in Switzerland, there is also the mandatory referendum. Two other possibility. The suspensive referendum means that the referendum is not mandatory, but you can trigger a referendum with signatures. The case of Liechtenstein is interesting because for constitutional change, there is no mandatory referendum, but they can vote for each constitutional change if they gather, I don't remember, but like 6,000 signatures, I believe. They are very few. So suspensive referendum means that when a law or a constitutional law is voted by the parliament, you can gather signatures to vote and call for the popular arbitration if you don't agree with the law. And finally, the abrogative referendum means that you can repeal a law, not only a law that is just voted, but also a law that is in the legislation, even very old. So this group includes veto rights, and then we can collect some institutions on direct democracy that don't give neither initiative right nor veto rights to citizens. And that's why sometimes we call them plebiscites, and other typologies tend to not include them in direct democracy. The first one is very interesting, is the minority plebiscite. It is when a minority in the parliament can call for a referendum. So if they disagree with the law voted by the majority. So this gives more power to the opposition. And this is typically the case in the Netherlands, in the Denmark, sorry. The government plebiscite, it is very rare. We don't find any institution of that, even if it is very used. A lot of governments, for example, the Brexit call for referendum, but they are most of time just ad hoc referendum. There is no a procedure that is already written. So this is a bit different from the minority plebiscite because the government is not in the opposition, so it is not constrained to trigger a referendum. So strategical reason can lead him to do it. And finally, the case of the head of the state. The head of the state can call for referenda in many countries, including France. Here is the example, and this the effect is very different according to the fact that the head of the state is against the government, so it is in the opposition. In this case, it is very similar in this logic to minority plebiscite. And in the other case, the head of the state is close to the government, so or even the chief of the government. In this case, it is like a government plebiscite. So this is the basic description we introduce in the report. And so the next slide, I believe I can comment to you if Clara change. Thank you. So based on that reasoning, we have classified for each kind of referendum what are the best example. So for the first type is the mandatory referendum. In many cases, we have noticed that when you look at, for example, the IDEA database, more than 100 countries are classified as mandatory. But mandatory is a bit unclear because in many countries, some constitutional changes are done without any vote, but theoretically it is mandatory. So we have analyzed what is really mandatory, in which country all constitutional changes are voted. So here there are 4 clear cases: Switzerland, Uruguay, Ireland, and Australia, and Denmark in many cases. So we have classified like this because Switzerland and Uruguay, they have also the initiative for constitutional matters, so they vote a lot on the constitution, especially Switzerland, and Ireland a bit less because the initiative is just parliamentary, and Australia same. We can also note that a referendum for changing the constitution could have some constraints to validate it. It is not only the majority of voters which is required, but also sometimes other requirements. In the case of Australia or Switzerland, they need also a double majority of the cantons or regions, states. So they, to be validated, a constitutional change need the majority of people and the majority of people in the majority of states or cantons. So this is almost not important in Switzerland because there are 26 cantons, so the correlation between the majority of people and the majority of scale is very high. But it is important in Australia because they have only 6 states, so they need 4 out of 6 in favor, and often the double majority is not reached. The Other methods in Uruguay is the approval quorum. So you need the majority of people, but also this majority have to be more than 35%. So you can see, I don't want to be too long, but here there is the classification for constitutional citizens initiative, with the threshold of signatures, for ejective referendum, and finally for legislative referendum. And we explain in the report why we have classified the country in this way. So, Clara, I can hear you.
I hope you are all surviving. It will get a bit less conceptual. Also, this is, although this is an important element, because in these slides, we will present some of the highlights from the report, looking at what happened, especially in the past, but also countries to follow in the future. So in the report, you will see plenty of graphs. There is a dedicated section that looks at short-term trends in the use of referendum. We decided to focus on the last 5 years because you have a lot of scholarly paper report that looks at the long term. So we really wanted to have a look at the short term, especially because these are interesting years, right? Before COVID, post-COVID, and that's also sheds light on the resilience of direct democracy in times of a global pandemic, where voting has been particularly complicated in a series of countries, but also where the executive in many countries took the central stage. So I will show a few graphs, but of course feel free to ask any question you have and have a look at the report, because there are more graphs like that in the report. So the first graph that you see with a gray bar and orange bar. So in this case, I also compare to the subnational level, because it gives also an idea, right, of how people voted in the last 5 years. And as you can see, well, a first conclusion could be that 2023 has not been a great year for popular votes around the globe. So we've seen a decline that is mainly due to COVID. It's difficult to explain it fully now, but what we can see is that there have been less votes in 2023 than in the past. This can change also next year, I mean this year in 2024, because in a series of countries, referendums and direct democracy instruments are activated at the very same time than elections. So we can already record a lot of votes going on in many different countries. So we will possibly see a rising trend in the next report. As you can see, but this is not a surprise, the evolution of the votes held at the national level are roughly stable, right? I mean, the difference is less marked, and they vary a lot at the subnational level. The second graph you can see on your right shows basically where these referendums have been held in the last 5 years. So I need to give a caveat immediately. This, of course, graph hides differences in the frequency, right, of use of the referendum in a country. So, for example, you see Hungary popping up, but of course, in Hungary, plebiscites were held, but it was only 1 year, and they focused on 5 different issues, so we recorded 5 votes. It's, of course, very different than if we look at Switzerland, where votes are much more frequent. So we discuss also that difference in the report, but I think this, looking also at the overall number, shows the diversity, right, of countries that voted where a popular vote was held. And here we aggregate, and I will present that in a minute, plebiscites and direct democracy institutions. We are well aware of the difference, but because both type of tools are often also amalgamated or discussed together in the media, we thought it was important to make the distinction, right? between plebiscite and referendums and look at also how people voted differently in plebiscite and in direct democracy institution. You will see also Liberia popping up with a series of votes being held also on constitutional amendments over the last 5 years. Looking back at the typology that Raoul introduced, we also looked at the type of direct democracy instruments that were activated over the last 5 years. So what we can see is a large number of votes concern constitutional amendments, mandatory referendum, as we say, where basically the representative have no choice but to call for a referendum to ask for the approval of a constitutional change. So this is a large share of the votes that have been held in the last 5 years. But at the same time, we see also quite a lot of plebiscites being held. And this has been a trend. I was mentioning also the fact that with the use of emergency powers during COVID and beyond, we've seen a strong predominance of the executive in many countries, but most of the time this predominance is associated with a plebiscite. So leaders that are seizing a lot of powers tend to do so also using and abusing the plebiscite. So we see a bit of a paradoxical or contradictory trend where you have mandatory referendum where basically citizens can veto a constitutional change, and plebiscite where also the type of question, and I will discuss some of the cases, are rather a caricature, right, of direct democracy. So these two trends do coexist at the global level. Then we see a lot of votes being held to reject a law, what Raoul mentioned as the basically a combination of the suspensive and the abrogative referendum. And still account for a large share. And of course, the fact that we see a large number of constitutional citizen initiative is mainly driven by the fact that here we record a lot of votes in Switzerland. And for the rest, we also use categories that are quite interesting to also show the diversity, right, of instruments that were triggered. Some referendum were triggered illegally, so we thought it was interesting to also record that. And we don't include them in the typology of direct democracy institution per se in the report, but also one recall referendum was held over the last 5 years. So as I was saying, key highlights. So first, there has been a decrease over time after COVID in the use of direct democracy institutions. Most of the votes are concentrated in a small number of countries, but there is diversity. When we look at the last 5 years, we recorded votes in 48 countries across the globe. So that's a minority of countries, but it's not nothing. And we see a coexistence between two trends, right? So citizen power, especially over constitutional change, and plebiscites that try to manipulate referendum to get the approval of governmental policies. The report also discussed some of the key votes that were held in 2023. And here again, we had to make choices, right? And it's not that easy to record votes that are going on. I will mention only a few. So in the map, you will see in red countries that held votes and are recorded in somehow official databases on referendums, and voted that went a bit under the radar in Venezuela and Chile in particular. As I was discussing the importance of plebiscite, so we see especially Uzbekistan, Mali, Central African Republic. These countries have implemented new constitutions through a plebiscite, and these constitutions are really characterized by an increase of the power of the executive. So we see also a trend that is worrying, where basically autocrats are using referendums to also legitimize their power and legitimize their power grab. The case of plebiscite in Poland was well discussed, so I will not discuss them extensively, but I would like to discuss countries that are rarely discussed also globally, and I would like to mention in particular the case of Micronesia. So in Micronesia, the votes held last year was quite unique because citizens decided to change the design of their referendum to make it easier for referendum to be successful. So the supermajority requirements in Micronesia is really demanding, and they decided to change it to lower the supermajority requirement. And for the first time in the history of this federation of island states, referendums were successful. So that was the first time since 1991. So that shows, as this is also the point that the navigator is trying to make, that the very design of the tool does matter to explain the level of citizen power over policies and also their own democracy. But you will find more. Maybe you have questions on a specific country. We're very happy to answer these questions. But if you want to know more, you can also have a look at the report for the countries that you are particularly interested in. I will now end of the floor to Raoul just to present something that we wanted to cover also in the report. We wanted to present in a very synthetic and easy way what researchers have focused on in last year. And we focus only on English publication. We may be able to do more in the future, but I think it's also good to see also what are the results of research and what is also the focus of this research. Raoul, do you want to say a few words about key findings?
Okay, just in very few words. Yes, you can find 3 pages on the big result. Of course, in English only. We have a lot of other literature, especially in German, but this is only in English. And we classified in 5 groups. The first group is direct democracy and policy, politics. Sorry, there is a mistake. Politics, this means what is the impact of direct democracy on the political system. And I just give you an example because it is very discussed in this year 2023, is about financing initiative. You know, you need a lot of signatures, and then you need to vote to have a campaign. And this could be very expensive, especially in California. There is a question on direct democracy in the United States. So it is only at state level, and especially in 4 states, but in general, there are 16 states in which there is the initiative. And in California in particular, some lawyer notes that the fund, the money for campaign is more high. For example, in 2020, special interests spent more than 785 million on only 12 referendum ballots. So it is very high. And the question is, do the special interest and the lobby have an influence on direct democracy? What is the impact of money on this system? So there is a famous scholar on direct democracy, Matsusaka, who published in 2023 also all the article on this year, an analysis on the 20th century to see if the special interests are more likely to trigger a referendum. And they find that no, this is not the case, and the majority of referendum, large majority, the special interest oppose the referendum. They campaign for no. So direct democracy is not really an instrument for promote special interest, but in many cases, special interest can produce an effect on the result with no. So this is an example of discussion on direct democracy and policy and politics. Sorry, direct democracy and public policy is different. For example, the question is what are the consequences for equality, the economy, or international politics of having direct democracy. So we found an English scholar found an interesting result on the question of the impact of referendums, especially in Switzerland, on economic performance, especially the exchange rate. The Swiss franc compared to US dollar. What is the impact of referendum on this change? And he finds that referendum are good for the quality of the money because they increase the value of the franc and also decrease the volatility. So this is another an example. The discussion on direct democracy and citizen attitudes is very focused on populism, and especially the demand for direct democracy in populist party. And recent discussions find that there is no clear link between them. There are also some articles on history of direct democracy, especially how it has been implemented in United States and the role of Socialist Party in this implementation. And the normative accounts are particularly focused on the compatibility between direct democracy instrument and citizens' assemblies. So how to merge these kind of institutions. That's it. Clara, do you want to conclude?
Yes, I'm trying to move the slides. It's funny, yeah? I struggle, but that's okay. One last aspect of the report that you will find, and that will be further developed in the World of Direct Democracy report, looks at country or developments to follow for next year. So we identified a few. I was mentioning Micronesia, which changed its referendum law, so we can expect maybe more votes to take place. We also included Taiwan with a discussion about the possibility of the current legislative initiative to be further constitutionalized, as there are debates in the country. And we discussed the country I work in, the Netherlands, which may reintroduce a suspensive referendum. We're still dependent on the second vote of the parliament. So it's also to convey the message that things are also evolving, and that the whole idea of the direct democracy navigator is also to capture the evolution of direct democracy instruments and their impact on practice over time. We spoke for too much, so we will be looking forward to your questions. We may not be able to answer to all your questions, but we will surely come back to you if you have a particularly difficult question for us. I see already many populating the chat, but I leave the floor to Anja to moderate this.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much for your introduction to first of hopefully many global states of direct democracy reports. And yeah, we have a lot of questions in the chat. So we will start from the first one and try to go through all of them in the next half an hour that we have left. And so you can keep asking your questions in the chat, or if you want to speak, you can also raise your hand. There is a react button in the lower menu. You can raise your hand and we will, I guess, alternate written questions and the raised hands. Yeah, and let's start with the first question. I'm in advance very sorry if my pronunciation of names and surnames is incorrect. But yeah, so the first question is from Peter Degischer. I'm surprised about the number of referenda in the US. Please, could you tell some examples? Yeah, Clara, maybe.
I can maybe explain because there are actually two questions about the US. So actually, what is quite interesting is that in the US, so roughly half of the states do have provision for direct democracy at the state level, right? So we should always remember that there is no direct democracy instrument at the federal level, right? And these are extremely well documented. So this is a luxury. So you can go to a website which is called Ballotpedia, and this records the referendums being held in the US. So you can also have a look of like at the type of decisions. I don't have like any popping up to my mind. As we were saying, this is the report is mostly focusing on the national level, but as you can see, the dynamism of what's going on at the state level in the US for us granted the need to also mention this country in the report, as this is a very dynamic country for direct democracy at the state reul. Raoul, I don't do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, exactly.
I see Joe is there. Maybe Joe, you have an example, right, of a referendum that took place in the US?
An example, there is famous referendum
In the last 5
about the
years,
death
Raoul.
penalty, for example, or about
But in the last 5 years, Raoul, do you have any?
death penalty, maybe not. Sorry,
So we can check
we can
Ballotpedia
check.
and come back to you. And referendum on gun ownership, honestly, I would have to check the data. I don't know out of the top of my head. Could have been the case at the state level.
Okay. Yes, thank you. And so the next question is from Erwin Meyer. Who has written the rules for direct democracy in observed countries? Is it always the parliament?
Want to take this one, Raoul? Who wrote the rules?
Yes, we are not aware of any case in which the parliament doesn't introduce direct democracy, at least in the modern form. So we know that the introduction could be before at local level, like in many cases in Switzerland, in United States. But this is always from the parliament. Of course, in many cases, the parliament is also react to a strong social demand, including a violent social demand sometimes in the 19th century. Clara, do you want to add something?
Actually, I mean, gonna give gonna spoil the news. We are just finishing a book together with Raoul where there is a chapter dedicated to the actually history of the introduction of direct democracy in different countries globally. And indeed, it's often introduced by some political parties, especially in the past, so-called populist political parties did play a role in also introducing direct democracy. And there are in Europe, part of the introduction of direct democracy, except Switzerland, is also due to democratization waves. So what we observe is that when a country, so for example, after fascism in Italy, direct democracy at the abrogative referendum was seen as a way of protecting democracy. But it's very rare that, for example, this sort of top-down introduction of direct democracy leads to very easy instruments to activate for citizens. Most of the time, these are also hard instruments to activate. when there is a social conflict, the rules are easier to activate for citizens. So you can interpret a bit as a tension between the bottom-up and the top-down introduction of direct democracy.
Yeah, thank you. And just as a reminder, yes, you can keep asking questions in the chat or raising your hands via React button below. And I think the next question also from Erwin, expands a little bit about that. Is there any relation of party politics and direct democracy, and do right-wing parties stronger argue for direct democracy than the left ones? Who is using it more frequently?
Well, I can give one of the few rule we observe. Basically, direct democracy has been defended by a lot of different parties, ranging from the socialist, the communist, the nationalist, the Catholic, the liberal, you name it. Their parties defend it when they are in the opposition. So when they are away from power, political parties tend to be very vocal about the need for direct democracy. And this comes with a side effect, which is that when parties come to power, most of the time they become more skeptical about a direct democracy. Why? Because this is a power sharing instrument. So the farther you are from power as a party, the more you see direct democracy as a tool to influence politics. When you are in power, you're not so willing to see a possible opposition through initiative and referendum. Raoul, do you want to?
Yeah, there are a lot of things, including I didn't cite it, but some studies in 2023 on the relationship between party politics and direct democracy. Clara is right. For the use, of course, the party in opposition use much more direct democracy than party in power. So that's why, for example, there is a nice article in Uruguay that shows that when the right wing is in charge, the referendum are leftist, and even they pass as leftists, more on civic values and also redistribution. And when the left is in power, the referendum are rather rightist or right wing, like taxes and something like that. So the initiation of referendum from the opposition, they are when direct democracy is introduced in many cases, is introduced by an alliance between right and left, or at least a different party, not only one side. And but for people, a recent article shows that leftist people tend to be more in favor of direct democracy than right-wing people. It's when just you use surveys. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. And the next question in the chat is from Chan. Are you aware of any evidence of direct democracy violating minority rights?
This one is for you, Raoul.
Yeah. Yes, of course. On average, minorities have an advantage in direct democracy because they can initiate legislation. So in many cases, Indians, for example, in central US, or even the linguistic minority in Switzerland, they gain from direct democracy because they have the initiative. But in referenda, the majority wins. So minorities have an advantage when because they initiate, but have a disadvantage when they vote. They are minority in vote. So to take an example, a typical case of right of minorities is gay marriage. And gay marriage in almost 90% of referendums around the world is rejected. So this is a case in which direct democracy could violating minority rights. But we didn't find any case in which just a contract like marriage agreement legally binding is rejected. This is never rejected, but just marriage. There is a problem, I believe, given what we observe through referendums.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So the next question is from Christoph Roland. And the question is, what are the purpose and the targets of Direct Democracy Navigator that you mentioned? It seems delicate to compare different countries with different cultures.
Here, of course, but there is, we have already a lot of database on democracies, for example, Freedom House or many others, VDEM, and they compare parliamentary systems, presidential systems, and also military systems. And this is useful to know that there are some institutions somewhere, and in other country there is no that institution. The impact of this institution could change according to the culture of each country, but the existence of these rules, it is important to know why they exist, when, where, when, and this is what we try to do.
Maybe I can also add to that. The key assumption of the navigator is that also different type of design of direct democracy institutions, they reflect different type of political culture and social contracts. So I was mentioning, for example, Micronesia, the so-called small island states, they do particularly interestingly in combining mechanism of say oceanic culture in terms of also giving decision power to the Council of the Chief or for like some specific groups within an island with modern form of direct democracy. This is something that we see quite prominently in such countries. So through understanding how direct democracy institutions are designed, we can also understand how they reflect dimensions of the social contract or type of political culture that are different from one country to the next. And it's through this comparison that we can see these differences.
We have another question from Erwin. Is there a comparison of special interests and lobbies on direct democracy in parliaments? Raul, I think you're muted.
Sorry. I had the same question as Erwin. And I looked for that, but I never found exactly this type of comparison. It is not exactly a comparison between direct democracy and parliament, but rather between parliament with direct democracy and parliament without it. So, and I find a lot of country studies on the place of special interest, but not without a comparison. And this could be useful if you want to do it with us. We are interested in.
That's a good one. Something that is particularly difficult, though, is that when there are direct democracy institutions in a country, we also observe that the rules, for example, to declare the activity of lobby in parliament are more transparent. So it's much more easier to get information about the activity of lobbies in the parliament and their registration. So that makes also the comparison difficult because when citizens have less control over their political system, they have also less access to such type of information.
The next question is from Keith Lander. Any papers, books, or essays specifically about interaction of university, media, and democracy?
The question is democracy or direct democracy, because with democracy there are a lot of essays, optimist or less optimist. Recently, for example, I read the book of Kaplan, very negative about democracy. But direct democracy, not clearly, because there are many articles, including empirical article, on the relationship between media and direct democracy. This, yes, especially in the US, like something like Arthur Lupia. And he found, for example, that people don't need a lot of information to vote correctly because they use shortcuts. But this kind of studies, there are a lot. But university, not. I don't see many things on it.
Anna, do you have something to add?
No, we can always, I mean, feel free to reach out. We can suggest always a few paper that looked at, I think something around that is a bit about the role of education as well in direct democracy system, and there has been quite a few paper about that.
Yeah, correct.
Good, and kind of in the same nature as this question from Mohamed Hikari, is there any study on direct democracy in Asia?
Yes, more and more, especially in Taiwan, but also in other countries. And there are, especially in our report, you can find some studies written by Asian scholars. I believe we have 2 or 3 articles.
Oh, I think we already ran out of questions. So yeah, are there any more questions? You can just unmute yourself now and ask them if you have any. If you don't, we have one.
Yeah, there is Erwin also
Yeah.
notes the referendum in Ireland. Exactly, it is in the 10% of referendum in which they vote yes to the gay marriage.
Yes. Yeah, and we actually have one more question from Chelan. Can it be concluded that those countries that practice direct democracy are better run and better managed than representative democracies?
Direct democracy means so with representative, of course, but they use direct democracy, even sometimes it's a strong form. And I tend to answer clearly yes. I don't find any. Sometimes I believe that yes. Many other find good consequences, especially economic consequences, and few study find terrible, not terrible, bad consequences. But there are also some bad consequences. On average, is clearly better. Yes, I believe.
Thank you. Yes, so again, if you have any more questions, please write them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask them.
Maybe a comment?
Yeah, of course.
There, at least I remember 2 studies 10 or 15 years ago on direct democracy's effect on financial issues. And they found the lower the hurdles are and the more frequently direct democracy is used, then the smaller is the budget, the smaller is the state influence, and the smaller is the deficit.
Yeah.
So the outcome is more or less citizens take care about financial issues more dedicated, I would say, than parliamentarians, because it's their own money. That was the
This
main
is
finding.
true. This is, I believe, now consensual, especially for mandatory referendums. Mandatory referendums clearly reduce the public debt.
Yeah. Well, since we are also almost running out of time, I have just one final question, because we saw that in recent years, at least with the graph, the trend in direct democracy is a bit more downward in terms of usage. Do you predict any changes in the recent year, in the years to come? Do you think it will be more used, or what are your predictions?
Well, I think as I was a bit mentioning very briefly, as in many countries, because organizing a referendum is costly, direct democracy instruments are combined with elections. So as we have a lot of elections in 2024, we can expect also more referendums. I think what we see also is an effect of COVID, because collecting signature for initiatives was particularly difficult during COVID. So it may be that it takes time also for people to catch up with that. So let's hope there will be indeed more.
Yeah. Okay. So if we do not have any more questions, Bruno let me know that he has a brief announcement to make, and I'm really curious what the announcement is. So.
Thank you very much. No, an announce. I just want first to thank, of course, Clara and Raul for this sharing, and of course of all your work. I think this really shows how the world of modern direct democracy is even richer than we did know before you made this report and all this collecting of information, and this makes us, of course, also always a little bit, let's say, frustrated in a way that we also know more about what we don't know, and what we not yet know, and how much this takes. But I mean, one key message also of this report is that it's really critical to go beyond basically the normative support for direct democracy, which many of us here and in these organizations involved obviously share. That it's so important to go beyond anecdotal knowledge, which we can compare out of our own experiences. And also, I think this academic work and research is absolutely necessary, and that Democracy International and Swiss Democracy Foundation, together with many partners, are really now taking together with you at the universities this work forward. I think it's very critical, and of course, always we have to say this also requires resources, and that's the reason why it's important to support us. And finally, maybe as a third takeaway, which always in these discussions coming up, is that we again see again in these findings that basically modern direct democracy is not the opposite to representative democracy. In contrary, it's making, in a good sense, possibly representative democracy more representative, which means respecting and mirroring the interests of more people and diverse people. So thank you very much. And my announcement in that way is that, I mean, we are entering the week of democracy. The International Days of Democracy are coming up. And already next week on Wednesday, we have a major event taking place in Bern at Democracy Tower, where we have a big day on democracy and media, how media can contribute to making democracy stronger, protected. We will have guests from all over the world, and this is an event you can join on site, but it's short time, of course, and maybe far away. So it's also available online. So I put the link to registration online, and I want to thank you. Now the trains are coming here, and that means also I need soon to take the train to come closer to Europe. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. And well, I also have a small announcement for everyone. That is, well, we are preparing more webinars for you on different topics. So yeah, I think together with the summary of this webinar, it is recorded, so you will receive also the YouTube video of this recorded webinar, link to Global State of Direct Democracy report, and also information about the next webinars. But if you for sure want to not miss it, I put also the link in chat. Yeah, subscribe to our news updates, and hopefully we will see you very soon more. Thank you very much for joining.
And I would like to extend a special thank to Anya for making this webinar happen, because she's really the motto behind this idea, recruiting speakers and organizing it and making the work of the Navigator feasible. So thanks a lot, Anya, for
Thank
all
you.
the work you're doing.
Same for
Thank you
me.
very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think we all do incredible job, and I'm very happy to also see so many people interested in what we do. Yeah, and then see you soon.